Welcome to the Mid-Penn Bank Podcast, hosted by President and CEO Rory Retriever. In this episode, Rory is joined by Catherine Lawrence and Eric Papenfuse, founders of the Midtown Scholar. Here's the conversation.
Okay, here we are with the Midtown Scholar, Cathy Lawrence, Eric Papenfuse. Thanks for coming in.
We're so pleased to be here.
We are really honored to be here.
And we're honored to have you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. You guys started the Midtown Scholar in 2001?
Yeah, even a little before that, out of our house in Shipoke in Harrisburg. It was
Before it was the Midtown Scholar, it was Shipoke Books. And it was
Okay,
really
so
our-
there is a little bit more to the origin story than 2001. And today you have a 15,000 square foot bookstore, retail bookstore,
Right.
and 50-ish employees, but you also have a warehouse.
Yes, 50,000 square foot warehouse. It used to be an old rag factory in the 1940s, but it works well for secondhand books too.
So how many of the employees are at the retail location and how many are at the warehouse?
It's about half and half,
Half
two
and
dozen at each.
Wow.
half and half. And the retail location has grown over the years too. If some of your listeners haven't been to the bookstore in a while, we are now 3 different buildings. We're a building on the corner, the major main building, which was an old movie theater back in the 40s and 50s. And then we now have a new collectibles building next door, which has only books that are 100 years old or older.
Yeah.
And you get to touch them and feel them and browse them in a nice environment. So we're sort of, in the world of books, we're trying to become like a city of books or an entire block of books and have something for everybody.
So you were the 2023 Publishers Weekly Bookstore of the Year. Yeah?
Yeah, that was very exciting. Yeah.
I'll bet. That's in the whole country.
Yes.
That's not like just a local award.
No,
That's
right.
a whole country.
We did, basically, you're nominated by people within the industry. It's the industry's highest honor that independent bookstore could have.
Now, did they have a big ceremony or did they have to do it?
It was a virtual one. We were heads on screens, but it was still that basically the American Booksellers Association annual event had just started to return to in person, but the meeting portions of it were still virtual.
We gathered the staff together at the main
Right.
store and we projected it, on the big
Right.
screen. So it had
We
a
had a
nice
party.
feel to it.
Yeah.
Do you think at one point, prior to COVID, was it an actual
Yeah,
Was it
would
an
have
actual
been-
ceremony?
It would have been held during the Book Expo America
Yeah.
at Javits or New York City, so
wow.
it would have been even more of a to-do. But we were still honored.
It was appropriate, though, because one of the reasons I think they chose us is because we were pioneers during COVID of the sort of remote book talk or the the online book talk. We hosted, I think it was over 150 virtual author events, even while we were closed, and we were forced to be closed for just to the
15
public
months,
for
yeah.
15 months. So,
All right. Well, so
Yeah.
take me back to the beginning, though. So you start in earnest in 2001.
well,
What was your inspiration for doing that?
So I grew up in Baltimore, and Cathy grew up in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And so we consider ourselves part of the Mid-Atlantic. We went to college and graduate school in New England, and we met in graduate school, and we were both studying the history of the book. I was studying sort of the American history of the book. She was studying the European history of the book, but we hit it off right away. And we came to Harrisburg originally to become teachers. Cathy got a job at Messiah College, and I got a job in the public schools. I taught in Central Dauphin, and I was teaching Latin, of all things, which is a good skill if you're dealing in old and rare books.
Correct.
But we always loved the sort of buying and selling and trading of books. We had an entrepreneurial spirit. And Harrisburg at that time, so this is in the late 90s, really didn't have a bookstore. And
There was no borders.
There was no borders. Take it from there.
Well, we went to maybe Encore Books. There was, however, the Book of the Month Club. And I heard about this from other faculty members. They said, go to the Book of the Month Club sale. And so really, and there were also lots of central Pennsylvanian auctions, as there are now. So we really started selling other antique items on eBay circa 1999, 2000, 2001. And we heard about a antique sale in halfway to Johnstown. I think it was almost as far as Johnstown, PA, in the first weekend of December. It was a blizzard. Very few people drove on the Pennsylvania Turnpike to this antique barn sale run by Amish farmers in middle of Pennsylvania. But we went because they were doing shelf lots of books by the box. You could get hundreds for a few dollars. And we said, oh, we'll put those on eBay.
These were used books.
Used books, secondhand books on eBay. And really, other than us and some Amish farmers and maybe one Philadelphia very high-end rare book dealer, nobody else made it out to the sale. So we drove home with a car full of antiquarian secondhand books to bring into our, living room and sell on eBay. And that was really the start of it.
So you said you both had the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
When you were first moving down here and you were a teacher, did you know that you were going to do a business at that point, or was it just it was kind of like a dream?
I think so. It was a dream, but it was also something that we, believe it or not, we thought that the hardest part at first was going to be, where do you acquire these books? How do we acquire books? And we quickly found out that it's very easy to acquire books. It's much harder to sell the books. And
store them and
right.
shelve them.
In the used book world, you're constantly accumulating thousands and thousands of books, and people are always trying to downsize. And so basically, it was a dream, but we decided to experiment right away. We went to those auctions. We did other things. Most importantly, though, this was the beginning of Amazon's sort of seller marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
The late 90s is when Amazon begins experimenting with used books. And we were some of the earliest people to sort of sign up for that and begin selling our used books on Amazon. And we were able to sort of ride that wave certainly for the past 25 years, but at least especially for for that beginning decade, as Amazon was growing by leaps and bounds. It was a wonderful way for people to buy books, and it sort of revolutionized the industry.
It opened it up for any third-party marketplace seller to join onto this international marketplace.
So wherever you were in the world, if you were in Japan or if you were in Italy and you wanted to buy this particular book and you could find it, and we had it on our shelves in Harrisburg, PA, then you could order it and Amazon would ship it worldwide. So that sort of changed the industry, because prior to that, books that maybe were considered rare or hard to find, were no longer rare or hard to find because people were selling them online. Whereas you could follow the trends of what was really popular in the publishing industry, and if you could stock those types of books, you could sell them really quickly. But we started literally with some boxes of books we bought at an auction in our living room. We quickly moved to buying some inexpensive real estate in Harrisburg. It was a great opportunity.
And so why Harrisburg?
Well, that's where we were. I mean, I was still teaching at Messiah College when we started, and it's an hour.
But why downtown Harrisburg?
Well, we loved the city.
Mm-hmm.
As we moved here. We came from urban New England, and we really loved being along the river, the beautiful, Capitol building, the neighborhoods, the character of them. And it was affordable in a way in which you can't really afford the few historic houses that there are. And,
mm-hmm.
Cumberland Valley are 18th century ones. And our house was affordable on a teacher's salary in downtown. And we're also an hour and a half from Baltimore, where our families were. So that was helpful.
We wanted to create a space that would be meaningful in the community, would bring people together, would inspire discussion, and we felt we could really only do that in the city. We were benefited at the time by the fact that it cost much less to buy property in the city than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to buy our first bookstore, which was it was the old Midtown post office building. It's not where we are anymore today, but it had been a post office for 30 years. It had fallen in disarray. The entire building we were able to purchase, for $50,000. Back then in 2002.
2000, yeah.
Yeah, and that was incredible. That was an amazing opportunity, and the goal was then, well, how do you bring people into the city? And Harrisburg had a long, rich history of doing this. There were many bookstores. There used to be many bookstores in the early 20th century. And we set about forming a neighborhood group called the Friends of Midtown, and organizing the local businesses. And this was before the market had really begun to be revitalized. But we were trying to get everybody together with a mission, which is, come on into the city and experience a sort of urban setting. And key to all that is having an independent bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
You can gather together, you can have coffee, you can have discussions, and you can not only talk about whatever the pressing issues of the day are, but you can also talk politics or community development or anything you'd like. And we started programming a series of events, including music, but also including some of the first debates that had been had in Harrisburg in a long time. And the community really sort of took to it, and we began building an audience that would eventually allow us to move into our much larger space down the street.
So that community engagement has to be the cornerstone of what you guys are trying to do to compete with, I know there's no Borders anymore, but the Barnes and Noble and Amazon, right? Because they're, even though you sold on Amazon, that they're now a competitor.
Yeah, right. From an in-person retail perspective, we very much trade on offering customer service. It's very much like retail banking. That's why we like having come to and found Mid-Penn Bank, because your tellers are retail business people, and that's how we see ourselves too. That sense of giving service to the community and welcoming anyone who walks in the door. You don't have to buy a book. You can just browse the books and have conversation and be part of that community.
Yeah, and it was one thing sort of bridging the East Shore, West Shore divide, which definitely exists in this area, which we found that very surprising when we moved here. People won't come across the river, really? But over time...
It's still that way.
Of course, it's still that way.
Not as much as it used to be, but
it was a real thing at that point. We even had difficulty finding realtors that would show us properties in the city at that time. But once we became comfortable for people to come in and visit, and we started sort of bridging the gap, the next frontier was, how do we get A-list authors, sort of big names, celebrities, to take their book tours and not just go to New York, DC, Philadelphia. How do we get them to come to Harrisburg? And we put together this whole pitch about how, first of all, it's a great, we're in between. If you think about Harrisburg, we're sort of halfway to anywhere else, right? We're sort of on the way to DC, or on the way to Philadelphia, or on the way to New York, or on the way to Pittsburgh, or you could stop here on your way out to Chicago. However you're driving, you sort of come through Harrisburg. That's always appealed to us. We're sort of at this transportation nexus for the entire East Coast. And once we started getting a few people, one of the first early authors to come to us was Salman Rushdie, the wonderful Booker Prize winning author. And then, word of mouth goes back to New York, and they begin to say, well, there's this great place in Middle America, this place where you can sort of experience a sort of small town Pennsylvania, and this is appealing to authors that want their works to not just be read in the big metropolitan areas of the big cities. So Harrisburg was the right location for so many different reasons, whether it was the cost of living, or just the audience, or the people, or the location. We've made the most of it, and it has really, really worked for our business.
So when did you move from the post office building to your current location?
I think that was about 2007, right? We were actually closed for a retail perspective for about a year, making that transition even as we continue to sell books online.
Well, speaking of banking, this was in the midst of the recession there.
Right.
We were everything was collapsing about 2007, 2008. And we told our bankers at the time, well, we want to expand. We want to continue selling used books. Also, that was the time when people were thinking, oh, everything's going to go ebook or electronic. Nothing. How can you continue to sell used books? But we persevered. We spent a whole year renovating this old movie theater with a storied history in Harrisburg. It was called the Broad Theater. Back in the 40s and 50s, there's still a few people around, old timers today, that remember coming to see the sort of Westerns and the B movies that played there. It was one of the few theaters in Harrisburg that was integrated. And one of the things that was important to us in being in Midtown is that Midtown is really the mixing point for the city of Harrisburg. The Broad Street Market, the bookstore, those areas are where everybody comes together, regardless of race, regardless of class. And this was the location that we wanted. This is what we wanted. And that's the way the Broad Theater had been. That's the way it had been for a long time. And we moved to this gigantic space, again, concerned with how are we going to fill all these shelves. And just over time, we slowly expanded, so much so that we were able to take over the buildings to our left and to our right. And it's just become a mainstay. But the main thing that we did from the very beginning was we put a stage in the middle of the bookstore. We said, we're going to honor this tradition as a theater, but we are always going to be a place where people can come and present. And that stage and above the stage, if you've been to the bookstore, we have an old church bell from the 1880s that we found in a salvage pile in a salvage yard. And we can ring that bell, to celebrate things or to get people's attention. And we created basically a town square in the middle of the city.
How big was the post office building?
1,500 square feet.
All right. So did you do
that was 2 floors, so it was probably smaller on each floor.
When you had Salman Rushdie, did he go to that?
No,
or
he was one of the first to come to our new space. The old space, we had some concerts, we had local authors, but
all the bookshelves.
But you've got to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, all the bookshelves in the old space, they were on caster rollers, so they would have to roll to the side for 100 people. I think was how many people we could fit with all the bookshelves pressed against the wall. But of course, then you can't actually sell the books if the bookshelves are against the wall. So in a new space, we make it possible to both browse and see an author talk at the same time.
And at the time, we were combining the retail with the e-commerce, and that's always been tricky to do. But we would have sort of sections of books that would be online only and sections of books that could be browsed. We've really refined that today so that now you can sort of browse and purchase anything, but it requires a lot of organization, a lot of very close monitoring of what's going on. We have over 1 million books, and in the main store alone, we have about 250,000 books, and you have to keep those in order, and to be able to find them if they sell just requires a lot of shelf maintenance, a lot of alphabetizing, a lot of time, a lot of key organization, and we sort of grew into all of that over time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what has been your most memorable event? Was it Salman Rushdie? I mean, that's a pretty big name, but
I'd say he put us on the map. But we've had some incredible speakers over the years. Early on, we decided we would host the Harrisburg Book Festival. We just said, if we build it, they will come. So we said, we're going to have a Harrisburg Book Festival. We're going to host great authors. It's going to be once a year. They're going to come. We're going to have a big outdoor festival and street fair and book sale. And we've had some great authors came to that. Some of my favorites have been George Saunders, who packed the house, Ibram Kendi. This is before he really shot to fame with some of his books.
Yeah, right. Oh, so many. So we have basically everyone from local author illustrators to who maybe New York Times bestsellers but are in our neighborhood to folks who've come. Let's see. I think we even had some during the COVID period when everyone went virtual. I think we had a Martha Stewart interview, and we had some authors from Britain who zoomed in. And now that we're back in person, we've had authors from Britain who will fly and travel to us. So that's been, I think, one of our bestsellers last year was by the book We Solve Murders by a British mystery author.
And you said you had concerts, at least in the old post. Do you still do that?
We still do, although we're mostly book-centered. One of the most interesting events that we had this past year was a combination book read a gospel concert. Do you want to describe that? Because it was amazing.
I honestly did not know that 8 performers could fit on our stage. It's not that large. We've had some student dance groups with maybe 6, but so this was James McBride reading from passages from his books and bringing his band as they were preparing to go on an international tour. And we were one of the first places where he and all of his band members came together. Some of them from Philly, some of them from Kentucky. So
how big was the band?
It was 8 pieces.
8
right.
pieces.
It was huge for us. It was a gospel band, and he chose the bookstore in part because he'd come before to give an author talk, but he wanted to sort of pioneer this new hybrid concert / book talk.
Right.
So they'd sing gospel tunes and then read from the book, and then the songs would sort of echo the themes of the book. Very, very interesting. And this was part of the book festival. And before that, in a small setting, he was able to give a seminar to a bunch of college students that had come in to learn about how to write. James McBride's a very accomplished, incredibly award-winning author who just gave very generously of his time. But that was the sort of thing we were able to do. We have both a classroom space, a main stage space. We can sell a lot of his books. So we report our sales to the New York Times. So if you want to get on the bestseller list, then you probably want to sell lots of books at a big, large talk. And he sold an awful lot of books at the talk. But that's how we brought music and talks together.
One of the things we most enjoy and are proud of for the book festival is that we sort of curate the authors who come, both for the books themselves and for the authors as people who want to come and meet and enjoy and be part of our community. So we will have, best-selling authors, but yet they will also speak to anyone passing by at the book table. So we had Edward Danticott, who your listeners may know from Breathe, Eyes, Memory, wonderful Haitian immigrant author. And then we also have, in past years, one of my favorite authors was Madeline Miller with her book Circe. And when we have these amazing authors and they enjoy the experience so much that we would have them back on their own right at any time, but they will also then offer to come and interview other authors. So it makes for a collaborative conversation. That was another great part of the book festival, is just sort of panel discussions of different authors speaking with one another about the process of writing, about the books and ideas that they have. And that makes for just a very exciting conversation for the audience to be a part of.
So do you do, how often do you have events? Is it once a week, once a month? Is it, and what day of the week do they typically fall on? Are they weekdays or?
Yeah, they are usually weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday. And I think we try to be sustainable for our staff about it, but I think we probably have about, let's say, 7 a month. So a couple a week. Yeah. Pretty consistently.
7 or so that would, bring in at least 100 people. So
right.
bigger events. And we try not to do too many events during the winter, given the weather. Right. But we ramp up, and we'll do a lot during certain parts of the year, especially when books, like in the fall, when all the latest titles come out and people are touring.
And these are mostly after hours events, right? So they're usually evening book talks at 7 o'clock, whereas the store itself, is open 10 to 6, 9 to 7 on Saturdays. So these will be basically opening the store especially for the author and the speakers.
Yep, and they're all generally free. It's just we sometimes require you to purchase the book, and we do that in part so that we can have enough books available, and so that you can reserve a seat, because oftentimes they'll fill up or will be at capacity, and that's really, really great. Cathy was saying we do a lot of pairing of interviewers with authors, which is interesting. So from an NPR standpoint, we'll have a Scott Detrow or a Steve Inskeep come, and then they will interview the political historian or the current events author about things of the day, and we'll just sort of sit in the background and listen to these conversations. So it's about creating conversations, very similar to what you're doing here on the podcast, but just sort of doing it on a stage in front of a live audience, and it's incredibly, incredibly fulfilling. It's what makes it worthwhile what we're doing. It was very hard during COVID because anyone could, sell a book behind a computer screen, sort of quietly and remotely without interacting with the public. But I think booksellers are really very social people, and they want feedback, and they want to know what people are reading, and they want the conversation, the discussion. And so you really need to be open and have spaces for that. And that's why bookstores right now are thriving. Communities, across the country want spaces like that. They want areas where people can come out and interact with one another, especially in an age when people are otherwise very isolated. And, it can be very solitary to be on your phone all the time and reading. Bookstores provide that sense of connection and space.
So you guys were kind of ahead of the curve in starting an independent bookstore, and then COVID kind of slowed that down a lot, right?
Well, it just
like the trend seemed to be from 2015 through 2020. It seemed to be going in the direction of the independent bookstore. But then did that kind of get?
I think there's been a resurgence.
There has been since.
Well.
You're absolutely correct. Like when COVID hit and we were forced to close, it literally shuttered the store for 15 months, and we didn't even know if we were going to have a future. It was a very difficult time. Mm-hmm. We tried to keep as many staff on as we could, but it was scary. And we did adapt pretty quickly to this concept of the virtual Zoom-like talk. But that was out of necessity because there was nothing else that we could do. But that was the only way to sort of bring people together virtually. And we were pretty successful at that. We were one of the largest bookstores in the country that was doing that for publishers, and publishers appreciated it too, because they were also, at a time where this is changing sort of every dynamic. Now, afterwards, after we reopened, it was also a very slow ramp up to people coming back out to events. Mm-hmm. We had a year or two where, events that would have sold out in the past, not too many people were coming out, or they were coming out very tentatively, just to But I think we've made it through that. We're back to where we were, certainly, and beyond where we were before COVID. It was a difficult few years, but people now, I think, to some extent, even appreciate it more. Mm-hmm. You don't take it for granted as much as you did in the sort of pre-COVID time. People know what they want, know what they're looking for, and they want that type of community.
Right.
Yeah. So when people come to these events, what do you have for them beyond the books? You have
we do.
Coffee.
Well, that was part of our move to the larger space. Instead of just having, trays of cookies, which we had in our original small space, we have a full service counterculture coffee. Is the direct trade coffee that we brew. We ship it in from North Carolina, and they're all sort of coffee grown by small co-op family farmers around the world. And so we can brew you an espresso or a latte drink, and all kinds of interesting specialty drinks. But then also within our complex, we also are home to a baker, Tammy, who runs Just Baked Cakes and Pies. So you can have an assortment of sweet treats and such. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a long tradition of the coffee house. This is something that Cathy and I were studying when we were studying the history of the book. You go back to like Samuel Johnson in London, and all the great poets, would hang out in the coffee houses, and the revolutions would be plotted in the coffee houses. But caffeine is an important part.
Right. And tea too, coffee and tea both. Right.
A very important part of stimulated discussion. Also, it encourages people to be a little bit more leisurely, to stay, to browse, to continue the conversation over maybe a second cup of coffee. So we wanted a space where people could do that, and they could do that in a larger setting. And we do have some of the best desserts, I think, anywhere in Harrisburg.
They are.
Tammy's sweet potato pie is to die for.
Legendary, right?
It's
and
legendary.
It's also a practical thing, because you might not need a book every day. Maybe you do, but you probably do need your favorite coffee or your favorite tea every day.
So how much of that occurs every day? Like, do you have the same group of people that come every morning and they get their coffee and they may get their pastry or...
Yeah, I think from a neighborhood standpoint, we have the neighborhood regulars that like to come to the bookstore. We're also pet friendly, so you'll see lots of dogs at the Scholar on the main floor, and we have treats for them as well. And so people, when they're making their morning rounds or their sort of daily trips, will come and stop by the bookstore. They'll get a cup of coffee, as Cathy says. Maybe they won't be buying a book, but they'll be the sort of heartbeat or the mainstay. Then we get a lot of people that will sort of come into the bookstore and support it because they support independent bookstores, and they'll be in there for the books. And then the events layer on a whole nother type of customer. For our events, we get people from all over the region. We have people that come from New Jersey or, up in Allentown, or they'll be driving all the way from Pittsburgh. And that's because the events have this very large regional draw. And that's very satisfying as well. They say, why can't we have a Midtown Scholar, in our community? There isn't a place like the Midtown Scholar in Baltimore. No, there are some nice bookstores in Philadelphia, but nothing quite as big or on the scale that the Midtown Scholar is in Philly. Nothing in Pittsburgh. So also in central Pennsylvania, we have just all these wonderful universities. It's a very sort of rich area, but Harrisburg tends to be the sort of cultural center, I would say, of central Pennsylvania, which means that automatically we draw from this huge region. And we know a lot of people that will come from State College, and this will be their weekend trip. They will go to the market to go shopping, and they will come to the bookstore, and that's what they do. And that's how they enjoy living in State College, or they enjoy living somewhere else in central Pennsylvania. So another
aspect that it really is unique to what we are trying to cultivate and we're pleased by is that it's an all ages space, right? So we have a fabulous, like 2 large rooms for kids' rooms, and young adults and teens have their own section as well, separate from the little kids. And we're stroller friendly. There's artwork and murals on the walls that have been painted and drawn by local artists and illustrators. So yes, young kids can come, older folks can come, and we love the fact that it's a place where grandparents and grandkids can hang out. This sense of being available and having a book for people of all different ages enables families to come as a group, or friends to come as a group, or come to us to meet up there, and that makes it an extra special place, because there are not that many types of places where you can go and have all ages welcome in that way.
Sure. And you said you have 250,000 books there on 3rd Street.
It's pretty impressive. Yeah, in every category of book imaginable.
But how many curated selections do you have?
Oh, those are all curated. Every book is hand selected for the
most
store.
of them are available only in single quantities. So there might be some that have 5 or 10 copies if it's a new release, but otherwise they're really single titles. All curated.
And you have a kids section, and you have do you have a
cooking, graphic novels? We just added LPs to our mix of things. So
one of the reasons we like to sell used books and new books is because there are not too many stores that do that.
Right.
If you go to a Barnes & Noble, which is fine to do, but you're really only going to find the greatest hits, or the current, maybe you go to Costco, you're going to see pallets, and it's going to be 30 or so different titles, and that's it.
Right.
And if you come to the Scholar, you're not only going to find all those books, but you're going to find the author's previous books. You're going to find books about the author, right? So if you're interested in Salman Rushdie, it's not just going to be his latest novel. It's going to be all of his novels. We might have a rare first edition of one of his novels. We might have some signed copies of some of his novels. We'll have some books that have been written about his novels by English professors at colleges. We'll have other books that are sort of part of his circle, or people that were inspired by him. So you can, there's just so much more to explore. And if that isn't good enough, you can then go down into our world history section, and you can read about those books, or go into current events or whatever. So it has something for everyone. As Cathy says, there are not that many places where a college student wants to take their parents, but we get that every weekend. We have college students that come back and they're back for the week, and this is what they're going to do as a family. And that's great. And there aren't that many places where you can find that type of depth, that type of, even libraries with all the budget constraints and sometimes all the politics and everything else, it's very hard to find a great assortment of different things depending on what you're looking for.
So what happens at the warehouse?
Well, the warehouse is a totally different beast.
It is, right?
And I used to spend all my time at the warehouse before I shifted to spending all my time at the retail store. You guys, don't mean to jump on top of the question, but you being at the retail store, is that important for your customers?
I'm sure it is, because basically it's not just an active curation behind the scenes. I mean, Eric really manually curates almost every used book that goes into the store. But I don't know if the customers appreciate that. Mm-hmm. They really care about the fact that we're kind of embodying this mission of, a culture of reading that we want to create. And so that's, I'm sure, important.
Yeah, we have to set the culture, especially for our employees, and then our employees can set the culture for the customers, and it's a sort of ripple effect. But if you're not present, this is one of the reasons we've really resisted franchising or creating offshoots of the Midtown Scholar. It seems to us it's so important to be there and to be part of that interaction, that if you spread yourself too thin, you're going to sort of dilute what really makes the Scholar special. So if we've got a big event, I'm there, Cathy's there, the whole staff is planned for it, and they're excited about it.
The leaders of the warehouse team will come to the big events too.
Yeah.
So
but you did ask about the warehouse.
Yeah.
The warehouse is not arranged like the bookstore. In the warehouse, nothing is sorted by subject. It's more like a warehouse that is in central Pennsylvania. You could be selling anything. You've got lots of pallets and lots of shelves, and you've got high quantities of books that are selling online. And
the books arrive by the tractor trailer load, which is useful for central Pennsylvania because we have great, trucking center. So when we're purchasing books, we're bringing them from New York or North Carolina, and those trucks need to get to Harrisburg to go out again, but they didn't necessarily need to bring anything with them. So it's cheaper trucking rates to bring things into Harrisburg for our warehouse sales than if it would be almost impossible to have that kind of e-commerce business if we were in Rhode Island or some urban center.
All the business at the warehouse is all e-commerce?
Yes.
Okay.
Warehouse is not open to the public, and that's good. It's not really designed to be. Cathy was saying almost all the publishers and all the book distributors are located along the 81 corridor, most in Pennsylvania, some down in Maryland. So from a book publishing industry standpoint, it's the right location to be close to them.
Right.
And so they will ship us a tractor trailer load of books. We will process the books. We'll say these will go to the shop. These will go online. These are the ones that we have in quantity. These are the unique ones that we'll send there. It's fun and it's exciting. Harrisburg has a rich sort of warehousing history as well. We're right over on 6th Street near the train tracks. In fact, there used to be a railroad spur that came up into our warehouse. And in the old days, in the 20s and 30s, our warehouse was a rag factory. Basically, people would remember taking and selling their denim by the pound or their rags by the pound, and then they'd bale it and ship it off to pulping factories via the train. Today, it's all truck, but it's still part of that sort of rich distribution network that is Harrisburg.
Yeah, so the books come in quantities, but they still go out one book at a time. Yeah. Single titles that are wrapped and packaged and posted and shipped out by our staff.
When you first started, what was your biggest challenge? Beyond capital and things like that.
Well, we thought it was going to be the accumulation of books, and then that proved not to be the case. We certainly didn't start with capital, so we thought that was going to be an issue. But we have had, and would be happy to talk more about how important it's been to develop the relationship that we have now with Mid-Penn Bank. That has helped us grow. I would say the biggest challenge, though, probably has been managing people and having to scale up our business from something that started with the two of us from our house to the hiring of the first couple employees to eventually getting all the way up to almost 50 employees.
Mm-hmm.
That is something.
Scaling is a challenge, and we did it incrementally over time, but now we're at the point where that's the right size to be in terms of staff and capacity, that where we want to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cathy does all the HR for the bookstore, which is more than a full-time job. We have a variety of different managers that sort of specialize in things, but coordinating it all is a lot. Now, we were fortunate to be able to grow slowly, but I know a lot of small businesses, I think they sort of stumble at that first step of bringing on the initial employees. And I think a lot of businesses sometimes have trouble sort of letting go of the hands-on nature of the business when you're first starting and it's your baby to having it become a much bigger thing that can exist independently of you with your oversight, but not requiring the same level of day-to-day management. I think those have been the biggest challenges. There've been many more surprises, though, many more positives that we just never thought. Putting Harrisburg on the map for book buyers, getting people to cross that river and come into the city to shop. These were all challenges. Also, building a retail culture of shopping in the city, where at the time there really wasn't one. That was part of it. We were sort of trying to pioneer getting people back into the downtown. If you look around the area of the bookstore in Harrisburg right now, you have things like the Millworks. Mm-hmm. You have the Susquehanna Art Museum. You have you have the beautiful Greenworks development. You have office building. You've got all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. None of that was there when we started. It all grew after the bookstore, and it's all sort of part of a sort of continuum of change. And there's more happening, right? There used to be blighted buildings on every block, and now there aren't in that area. Even the few that used to be there have become something new. There's new restaurants and new apartments opening sort of every day.
So how much did the Broad Street market fire negatively impact your business, if at all?
I think in a direct way, it's noticeable. But we draw people from the surrounding community and across the region to us. So it did not have as much of an impact as it's had on some of our neighbors. Yeah. And definitely for the farmers who were affected within the market and the resources they relied on, it's much harder.
Because
from
you're
a neighborhood
almost right across the street from that.
We're directly across the street, and the fire was devastating. And there was a new temporary structure that's been built there. A lot of the vendors have returned. I mean, there was a whole year there of a lot of uncertainty regarding that. I think we were able, as Cathy says, to persevere because we have an audience that's coming in for our events or knows us for our coffee or is coming in for books there. But there certainly were a lot of people that combined, let's go to the market, get our groceries, let's stop by the bookstore. Yeah. And that stopped for a while, although that's coming back. But the market in general is why we decided to move to that space. Sure. Right. We chose to move to be across the street from the market because the market, stretching all the way back to the Civil War, has always been the sort of heartbeat of that part of the city. As I say, it was the places where people came to mix. It was always a dynamic, sort of exciting retail place. And
an engine for small business growth and development, right? Because you could have a stall there, whether you're baking pies or cookies or yourself a farmer with your wares, and then you could grow to be your own establishment. Mm-hmm. And we've seen many, many times that happen very successfully over the years. So it's a really important business generator, I think.
Have you ever had partnerships with the Broad Street Market or any of its vendors or any other local businesses?
Of course. Yeah. From the very beginning, we'd stock, this treat from this vendor, or things along those lines. We'd work with other neighboring businesses, as I say, to form associations or to draw people, joint marketing campaigns.
We helped establish Third in the Berg for just that reason, to have people coming, have the market
Third in the Berg.
Third in the Berg. Third Fridays has been going on for probably, I don't know, over 7 or 8 years, maybe almost 10, and open late. Many businesses and art galleries in our area on the third Friday, and the market was a part of that too.
Didn't they used to have First Fridays?
Sure.
Downtown?
Yeah. This was.
I think they did.
That's part of why you go with the third Fridays, because
it's third Fridays in Midtown.
Yeah.
Incidentally, we should talk about Mid as part of a name, because we chose Midtown Scholar at a time when actually our little post office building wasn't even in Midtown. It was sort of in what the locals would consider uptown, in part because we wanted the name to reflect being at the center, right? Being at the center of everything and activity. And it became, it worked perfectly when we moved across from the market and we put out our neon sign that simply said Midtown on it, which has sort of become iconic. But we also wanted people to think, well, maybe they could be in Midtown Manhattan, or they could be in Midtown in any city,
right? Because
every city has a Midtown, and we're aspiring to be something great. What's the story behind Mid-Penn Bank?
So we started in Millersburg, and we were the Millersburg. I think the original name was maybe Millersburg Bank, and then it became Millersburg Bank and Trust, and then it became Millersburg Trust, and I think it was in the 70s or maybe the 90s when they wanted to get away from just being, known as a Millersburg Bank.
Right.
So they did the big move of going to Middle Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Mid-Penn.
that's great.
Yeah.
And which was great at the time, right? It was a lot more expansive than Millersburg. But, all these years later, we're in New Jersey, we're all throughout Pennsylvania,
right.
and we've talked about it at the board. We don't talk about it much anymore, but we did talk about it for years about, what should we change our name to? Now that we're moving really out of Middle Pennsylvania, and it's like, it's too late.
Well, but also
the name means too much, and people, we opened up an office in Camden, New Jersey a few weeks ago, and someone down there said, well, what are you going to call that one? I said, we're going to call it Mid-Penn Bank.
Yeah.
Well, do you think people will be okay with that? I'm like, no one cares. Like, they don't care because they're not doing business with you because of your name. They're doing business with you because of what you do when they come into your place of business, right?
Yeah.
But your name actually, you're right. There are Midtowns in just about, every.
See, we did think about the next step.
Right.
I told you we didn't want a franchise, but we knew we wanted to be able to grow with the name. We knew we wanted to be able to always be, maybe people would someday confuse us with being in Midtown Manhattan, and we were happy with that.
Right.
But I think Mid-Penn and Midtown represent that sense of community, right? You're in the middle. You're in the action.
Yeah, and it's again, it's not just the name, it's what you do with the name. And you guys have built a business that's not just a bookstore. You've built a place for people to gather, right? And I think that's a real neat aspect of your story. So I asked a question of the challenges that you had when you first started.
Yeah.
And what are those challenges today? And I suspect that a big part of it has just been adaptability over time, because you can't be doing things today the way you were doing them back in 2001. And you probably aren't doing things today like you were doing them in 2019. So how do you determine what's next for the Midtown Scholar?
Yeah, you might want to answer the what next part, but the concept of being adaptable is what we've always been, what we've always needed to do as a small business. So we're just always doing that. Some things might get changed up in a 5-year cycle and some things on a 5-month cycle, but the capacity that we have to realize that anything might need to change at any time, we are always at that point, because we have to be able to adapt to the changing interests of the consumers and the changing neighborhood of our neighborhood and of our staff and the community of which we're a part.
Right.
As it changes, we need to change in response to that. So we're, I'm always ready to try a new method of database, assessment, which is what really the warehouse is all about, a database of books. But you wanted to, I think, to talk about what next.
we've always grown and expanded. So even when we moved into the new space, we slowly we created a children's wing. We created a new rare book room. We expanded new books, and instead of just when we first started just doing the older and the antique books, we now have an entire collectibles building. But one of the things that is most exciting about the future for both Cathy and me is we've decided to create a new nonprofit wing that's going to work in concert with the Midtown Scholar. It's called Community Reads. And it is, we've already received funding from a number of generous organizations that really support this literacy mission. But it's going to allow us to take the events that we're already doing and make them even more impactful. Because historically, we found that there is a barrier to entry to some of these books, whether it's the, to talks, whether it's the cost of the book, or it's just maybe the slightly intimidating factor of going into a bookstore to meet these authors. We're going to be giving away a much larger percentage of books as sort of in partnership with these bigger events to try and expand the audience even further. I told you it's been exciting to grow that audience, right? We sort of saturated the Harrisburg area, then the central Pennsylvania area, now the regional area. But how can we get an even broader demographic, even expand the conversation out of doors of the bookstore? And that's what Community Reads is going to allow us to do this year.
Right. Yes. Right. So it's not replicating, different additional Midtown Scholars, but rather deepening and broadening the work that we're already doing within the community, so that even if we have events right now that are free and open to the public, if you can't afford the book, you might not feel comfortable coming. And so Community Reads is going to seek to address that gap.
That's great.
Yeah. Or if you're a teacher and you want to participate, we'll provide you with copies of books to a whole series of talks, or for people within your organization to be able to come, especially if you're doing that type of outreach that we're supporting in terms of reaching people who aren't normally reached for these types of talks. So that's the next frontier. And actually, there was just an interesting article in Publishers Weekly this past month about how nonprofit bookstores are really beginning to emerge in the industry. It's a new trend. It's a very positive one because it sort of combines the best of both worlds with a little bit more of a social impact. But our goal has always been to be as impactful as possible, to reach as many people as possible. So we're continuing to push that frontier even further. And this has also I think it's going to lead us to some interesting additional book distribution partnerships. It should help us get access to even more books that we don't have access to, which in turn we can spread throughout the communities. In central Pennsylvania, there are so many wonderful libraries that are doing good things. There are a lot of friends of the library groups that are always doing fundraisers and book sales. There are various, like the American Association of University Women and groups that run book sales and do things. All these groups need support, and we can sort of help support them in a way that helps build an even bigger book culture and has an even greater impact on people in the region.
So how close are you to fulfilling all the dreams that you guys had back in the beginning?
Oh, I think that we've already exceeded what we possibly would have imagined from our, third floor of our house, where the books were all practically in the attic,
Yeah, we had to heat them out of the floodplain because remember we started in Shipoke, and our kids remember a fish in our basement. That was the big excitement when we first moved to Harrisburg. Happily, the bookstore in Midtown is at the high point. We're literally on the crest of a hill in the center of the city, which is the place to be. I'd say I'm sure we've exceeded our wildest aspirations. But the degree to which we can continue to make meaningful impact and change is the way to go. And it has been both reassuring and a very positive development to see bookstores currently thriving. We would not, wouldn't have been honest if we hadn't said we were worried for a time there about the advance in e-readers and whether or not people were going to turn away from the printed word.
Yeah.
And it hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened for a very particular, I mean, people who use the e-readers also read regular books. So it's not like it's entirely replaced it. It's become a convenience. But I think people have gone so digital in all aspects of their lives that they really relish returning, at times to quietly reading a book or doing something that maybe is a little more old-fashioned, but certainly different from what they're doing on a daily basis.
Look, the e-readers are great. They're convenient. Yeah. You can take them on a plane. You can, take them on a beach. You can read them in bed at night without it falling on your face when you fall asleep.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that can happen, but it's not as painful as if you're reading War and Peace. But you can't, like, when you want to get your next book, there's no one to talk to.
No.
Right. And if you want to give a book to someone, if you enjoyed
a
book and want to give it to someone, the physical object is much easier to share.
Yeah, books make amazing gifts. This is the thing. And if we know our customers, we know we can help find something which they're going to enjoy giving to somebody else, whether it's that perfect gift for somebody they know well, or maybe it's a graduation gift for a student or a friend of the family. Books make amazing gifts, especially if they're done thoughtfully. And we have great booksellers at the Scholar that can recommend something. And if you're at your wit's end, we even have this thing called Blind Date with a Book, which is we have specially wrapped books with little clues to what's inside on the wrapping paper, but you don't have to make the full choice. So you can just be surprised, and you can get it pre-wrapped and ready to give to somebody that wants that perfect gift.
Are there any associations of independent bookstores that you guys belong to that you go to and communicate with other independent bookstores and get ideas that might work in another state or another area?
Yeah, we've been members of the American Booksellers Association since really, I think, when we first opened. That's the national industry group, and it helps startup booksellers learn, well, how do I buy insurance for my books, and lots of basic startup questions that ABA helps and has for decades. And then also the local or regional version of that is called New Atlantic Booksellers Association, and we've also been a member of that for many years.
And we're members of the Emerson Collective, which is a new group of bookstores sort of committed to this nonprofit mission drive. One of the things that Cathy and I love to do in our spare time, we're going to be doing it next weekend and the following weekend, is we like to go visit other bookstores, and we like to help them if we can, but also learn from them. And we're already planning travel to see book-selling colleagues in New Orleans and in Tulsa and elsewhere. It's both part of the trade, because you need to sort of support and be part of that industry, but it's also a great way to learn about another place. I mean, if I were recommending people, if you're going to visit a place and you want to stop in somewhere to get just a little sense of the culture and what's going on, and you want to ask somebody maybe where you should have dinner or what else you should do, go to your local independent bookstore.
What's your favorite other bookstore other than Midtown Scholarship?
Oh, that's really, really hard to say.
I have some.
I mean, I think I would say the Strand in New York City, although that is just I have to say that. Yes.
That's on a different level. That's the one remaining incredibly large bookstore. It used to be part of Booksellers Row in New York, and all the rest have closed. But the Strand owned its building from the beginning, which is a very important thing, something that we are pleased to have done, and so they've been able to stay. I like Powell's Books in Chicago, which is a little different than the Powell's books out in Portland, Oregon. But same Mr. Powell, just a different branch. It's at the University of Chicago campus, and it's a true scholarly bookstore. So it meets all of our desires. And then we have been very fortunate. One of the ways that we've acquired inventory over the years is that we have purchased the inventory of bookstores as they have retired or decided to move along. So we've actually had the pleasure of several of our favorite bookstores we've been able to purchase. There was a wonderful bookstore up in Cambridge, Massachusetts called McIntyre and Moore that we went to in graduate school that we loved. And well, lo and behold, once we became the Midtown Scholar and they were ready to retire, they called us and they said, "Do you want to buy 250,000 books?" And we said, yes,
and the
we
bookshelves
do.
Too. So we still have the shelves of McIntyre and Moore.
With Larry McMurtry, the great Western author of Lonesome Dove, was also very famous because he was a bookseller as well. That was his true passion, was bookselling. He wrote as well. He had a bookstore in D.C. and he also had a sort of city of books in his hometown of Archer City, Texas. And about a decade ago, when he retired, he decided he was going to have something which he called the last book sale, in which he put up all of his books for auction. And booksellers came from all over the country to this one stoplight town. It's a blinking yellow light in Archer City, where there were these 3 bookstores that Larry had put together. And we got to purchase. We were the large buyers at those sales. We brought a lot of those books by Penske truck, hand-driven from Archer City, Texas, back to Harrisburg. And he writes about in his memoir books. Larry McMurtry writes about the concept of being a custodian of these books from sort of one generation to another, or from one bookstore to another. We have. I'll tell you just one more interesting anecdote. We deal with a lot of older antiquarian books, and the key to selling an older antiquarian book is really to tell a story about the book which somebody is going to find compelling. It's not just that you have maybe an old edition of Julius Caesar's commentaries. It's that you had a copy that was owned by a pirate, or was owned by a soldier. We had a book that was literally owned by a soldier who fought at Bunker Hill. Wow. His name was in the book, the date was in the book, and inside the book there were pieces of clover which had been pressed inside the book. And if you've ever been to the Bunker Hill Monument, you'll know that it was a clover field and there were cows, and you just wondered, did he put that in the book? I discovered a book just yesterday that had a coat of arms on it that was the coat of arms of Madame de Pompadour, who was the mistress of Louis XV of France. And Louis had given her this coat of arms to make her more respectable, because you couldn't just be a commoner as a mistress in France at that time. You had to have a coat of arms. And she put it on her books. And this was a book that was about the court and secrets to being successful in the courts of Louis XV. Wow. What a great thing. And so we try and we have a little YouTube channel that we do for the bookstore. We can talk about social media for a minute. We do lots of things on Instagram, and but we do some longer form stories about our books on our YouTube channel. So people should check that out. It's just at Midtown Scholar, and it is it's the stories behind the books. And every week we try and tell a new story about an old book that we found, or that has just come into the bookstore. This keeps me excited creatively. It sort of goes back to when we were teachers, or we were studying the history of the book and we wanted to be teachers. We can do it. We can do both of these things.
So what are all your social media sites?
We are Facebook and Instagram, and Midtown Scholar is where you'll find us at Midtown Scholar, and then YouTube as well.
Yeah, it's been great talking about continuing education. Cathy has just applied to take a course this summer at the University of Pennsylvania. That
Rare Book School.
It's a rare book school, but it's about a bunch of books that we purchased from a famous historian.
Yes, right. So we went to a book sale at the University of Toronto Libraries, and discovered that hundreds of books by one of the professors who had inspired me to study history. I had only ever read her books. I don't think I ever met her, but when she passed away in her 90s, she gave her collections to the libraries for them to then sell for their fundraising, and we purchased as booksellers, and they have these amazing, eloquent inscriptions in them, because these were gifted to her in many cases by the authors, thanking her for the generosity that she had showed them as a professor and academic. And so each book tells its own story of the connection between the giver and this professor as the recipient, or back and forth. And it's wonderful, the amount of story that can be contained within just the margins of a book.
Wow. Yeah. All right. So how many books do you read in a year?
Oh, we read through many. One of the nice things about being a bookseller is that we can claim them briefly as they pass through our hands. So the number that can be on our shelves at any moment is numerous, even if they're going to go onwards.
We when we first met on our first date,
that's true.
We admired each other's bookshelves, and Cathy was the first person I had met who had more books than I did. So that was a wonderful thing. And when we combined our bookshelves into one, we discovered we had a lot of the same books. We both love the plays of George Bernard Shaw, for instance, and just many other things. One of the hard parts about being a bookseller, though, is you'd think you have all this time to read because you're surrounded by the books, and you do have time, but you also have to. You're constantly busy, and you are sort of forced to. We're in the business of selling the books. We're not collectors. That is part of the key. So we're finding all these great things, but our job is to sort of package them and send them off into the world for other people to appreciate and enjoy. And so that brings us in contact and has us reading all much more widely and diversely than we would if we weren't. I get to read. I read a rare physics journal article by Stephen Hawking the other day from the 70s. Didn't understand most of it. I'll be honest with you, but this was his like scholarly article, his precursor to his big theories of the universe, and that just came in a box of old scholarly journals, and it was amazing to sort of read and experience. So we're constantly learning, and I think if you're not interested in constantly learning, probably bookselling is not the way to go.
Right, and it's hard to find time to make it through all the way to the end of the book because there's so many that come through. So you really has to be a high bar if I'm going to actually read the book immersively, as I like to do. And the last one I've done in that regard is actually a publisher's advanced reading copy of a book called Great Black Hope, which is coming out in June by Rob Franklin. I think it's going to win lots of awards. It's a great book. And so that I'm actually diving in to make it through to the end of that one. I have till June.
And what's the website for the warehouse?
We have one website for all our endeavors, which is midtownscholar.com. And then from that website, you can choose whether you want to browse our new books, our rare books, or our used books. They all come through that spot.
Midtownscholar.com.
That's right.
And the social media sites are?
Yes, Midtown Scholar.
Midtown Scholar.
Correct.
And you're on Facebook and Instagram.
And YouTube, that's right.
And
YouTube for the long form, for the videos if you want to see things.
Right.
And
we still do film many of our author talks. So if we are able to, through arrangement with the publisher, even though we'll have it in person, but we'll also have a live stream or recording after the fact available online.
That's right. We have some of our best talks from last year's Harrisburg Book Festival or on the YouTube channel. We have a talk coming up by this month that'll be on. So if you can't make it in person, you can go to YouTube and you can subscribe and you can watch it either as a live stream or after the fact. And you'll find our books on all different platforms. Like you might order a book on Amazon, you don't even know it's coming from the Midtown Scholar, but it may be coming from the Midtown Scholar. People are surprised when they see that. And a lot of the older books we like to sell on eBay because that is a system that we started on long ago, but it allows for lots of photographs and lots of detailed information about the bindings and how things look. And so each site sort of has its own specialized audience, and we try and work with as many of those as we can.
And when's the book festival? October?
Yes.
Is it a how many day event?
It's probably about a week-long event, right?
Yeah.
It probably runs Wednesday through Sunday.
It's become a week-long event. We have the big tent sale that people know about, and then the author talks, and we try and do the biggest of our talks during the festival. We had a great panel this year on 50 years of Stephen King. Now, we couldn't get Stephen King. That was a little, but he did come virtually, and we had 4 or 5 horror writers that were all his proteges came, and it was an amazing sort of homage to King and talk about King. We had another panel discussion on the new genre of romantasy, which is a big deal. And some of our best-selling books today are what you would call romantasy, which is basically I would say fiction with a romantic twist, adventure fiction, or supernatural fiction. It's a growing and expanding field. So yeah.
Well, listen, thank you guys both for coming in today, Cathy and Eric.
It is our great pleasure. Thank you so
and
much.
for improving the Midtown area and really all of Central Pennsylvania with your business, and wish you continued luck and success. And we're proud to have you as customers of Mid-Penn Bank, and hopefully get down to the book festival this year in October. And but get on the website, midtownscholar.com. Check them out on YouTube, check them out on Instagram, check them out on Facebook, and go support a great local business.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Our
thank
pleasure.
you.
Okay. And Scott, we'll be back. Next up, we got Todd Schill, I believe.
That is correct.
My friend Todd Schill, who is a local attorney, but also has now expanded into sports and entertainment. And he's really a fascinating guy, and I think it's going to be a great story. So that'll be up in a couple of weeks. But thanks again, Cathy. Thank you, Eric, for coming in today and making this a great episode. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Mid-Penn Bank Podcast. You can find more episodes at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and more. Do you have a question about the podcast? Email us at podcast@midpennbank.com.
References in this podcast to Mid-Penn are to Mid-Penn Bancorp, Inc. and its subsidiaries and affiliates. This podcast expresses the views of its participants and may not represent the views of Mid-Penn or its officers and employees. In addition, these views are subject to change without notice, and Mid-Penn has no duty or obligation to update the information contained in this podcast. This podcast is being made available for informational purposes only and should not be used for any other purposes. You are encouraged to consult with competent legal, tax, accounting, or investment professionals before engaging in any financial transaction. Mid-Penn does not make any warranties as to the accuracy or completeness of the information in this podcast, does not endorse any third-party companies, products, or services, and assumes no liability for your use of this information. Forward-looking statements should not be considered guarantees or predictions of future events. This podcast is the sole property of Mid-Penn and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in whole or in part in any form without prior written consent of Mid-Penn.